welcome. In today's video, we're going to take a look at how to build an information dialog component. Essentially, what we can do with this is inside of our app, we can display whatever information we need to with the click of a button, and we can have limitless options as far as what text to display within one information dialog component, which makes it great because you only have to build it one time. It eliminates about a half a dozen different controls from your app on every screen where you would need to create that information dialog box. And what you're going to find is that a lot of times in your app development area, the information that you're displaying from app to app, a lot of times it's the same. Now you do add obviously a lot of customized information within the app as well, but there are some core things that are pretty much standardized across a lot of the apps. Maybe you need to explain basic processes inside the app. A lot of those processes are the same from app to app. And then you can also modify this to include every other possible information requirement you have, all within this one component. And we're going to make it very dynamic and allow for adjusting fonts and colors and pretty much everything for this to make it work for every different app design option that you have out there. Now, this is my third video on components. So if you want to check out the header component video, you would click right here in this link. And then the other component video that we just got done doing and publishing is the left side navigation. We'll be doing another video on left side navigation using a different approach in the future, but you can also check out that video here. If you're not familiar with components, components are essentially like the building blocks of an app. Think of them in terms of like a Lego that you put together. You've already kind of got a lot of these Lego sets these days have little people that are already built, and they have whole components that are essentially built, and you just kind of collect them. It's not like the old days, like I remember, where it was just a bunch of blocks that you put together. Now you've got essentially trees and people, and you got all these different things that are kind of components within your design. Another way to look at it might be in terms of like a computer. I do a lot of computer builds myself, and I don't buy a bunch of transistors and resistors and all the different pieces to make up the video card or the motherboard. I just go buy the component of a video card or a motherboard and I put it together. This saves a lot of time. Imagine if you had to build a video card or you had to build a motherboard. How many days, weeks, months, years would you spend building what you could go to the store and buy pre-built for you? And components are the same way. Instead of building a header, or instead of building a left navigation, or instead of building the information dialog box for every single app, maybe for every single screen, all you have to do is build it one time inside of a component, and then you can bring that into your application and put it on every single page, customize it, and make it work for the design of the app. Or think about it in terms of a development team. Maybe you've got a team of Power App developers. Creating component libraries allow for everybody to use those, and you can keep a consistent design methodology across all the different apps. It makes it a lot easier for the user because they kind of know what to expect when they open up those apps because they've all been using the same component libraries. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right into actually building this component. You might be wondering, why are we focusing so much on components? Well, we plan on doing actual apps on here as well. And if you really think about it, components are kind of just mini apps anyway. So we're essentially building apps every time we build a component, but we're planning on using these components within the apps we're going to develop on this channel. So these are kind of the building blocks in order to get to that step where we build more complex apps. All right, let's go ahead and jump right into creating this app. So first, let's go ahead and change this, and we'll call it the info pop-up. All right, and then we need to think about what we're going to do with this. Actually, before we do that, let's go to the settings and make some adjustments here. And you can adjust this color here. This is the color I typically go with for all of my component builds, and you'll see that kind of matches the header and that kind of stuff as well. So it's just kind of the theme I typically go with. And we can adjust this image here to kind of match which component we're building. So let's go with the chat. That kind of looks like an information dialog box. And then we'll come down here and we're going to turn on modern controls. We want to adjust our display here to be landscape. Apply, and then I also want to take a look at our experimental features here, and there's one in here for components. So let's go ahead and enable that and click close. All right, now we want to adjust the settings here. So for the width, we want to make sure that this is the app.width, and then we want our height to be app.height. That way it's going to match the screen. Whatever screen dimensions that we put it on, it's going to match that by default. You can always adjust these later on, but we do want to set those as kind of the default setting here. Now for the fill, this is something you might want to change, right? So when you put an information dialog on the screen, a lot of times you want to block everybody from doing anything with it. You don't want them to be able to click on other portions of the screen. And our component background is going to give us that capability. You might want to adjust it so it's not transparent. You might want to put something like a gray with a transparency so that they can see this stuff behind it, but they can see that something's changed to the point where they're clicking on it and nothing's happening. They know to go to the X to cancel this out and close out the information dialog. So let's go ahead and create that property. And we're going to call that the info pop-up background. And we'll call it a color and create. Now we want to set the fill to that. So we'll go ahead and come over here, info pop-up background color. Now by default, everything is always black or 100. So let's go ahead and change this to transparent and go 0. All right, so now we've got that in there. We can adjust this inside of the app later. For now, we're just going to leave it as transparent. And that's essentially all the things we want to do at the component level. So let's go ahead and start creating our containers. And for this one, we want to do a vertical container. And let's go ahead and search for container. And you can see vertical container here. And think about the design. When you have a information dialog, you've got buttons up here, and then you've got the text here. So it's following essentially a vertical container. It's basically stacking. That's what this is trying to tell you here. And we'll put that in there. It doesn't really matter where it goes, so we'll put that there. Let's go ahead and change the name of this right away. So we'll call that the info container. All right, so we've got that in there. Now, in terms of how we want this thing to be designed, we want essentially buttons up on top. Typically with a dialog box like this, you've only got one button, and it's usually the close button. But we want to make sure that we can use this design if that was to change. Maybe we've got to do more with it. Maybe we have the ability to copy something or the ability to do something else. We want to have the ability to add other buttons here very easily. So we're going to need a container for that. And that'll separate that from our text right here and allow us to basically add buttons in a horizontal configuration. Because if we add multiple buttons right now, they're just going to stack on top of each other. So let's go ahead and add a container here. And this one will be a horizontal container. So it's going to go left to right or right to left. We want to do one more container. So let's go ahead and insert another container. And this is going to be the text message or whatever we're going to put in the box, but we're going to put the vertical container. So now we've got all of our containers that we need. And let's go ahead and call this the button container. And then this one we'll go ahead and call the content container. All right, now let's go ahead and add stuff. So we basically get everything that we need, and then we can kind of go through and adjust all the properties. So let's go ahead and add the button up here, and that will be a cancel button. There we go. And then here we're just going to add a text. So we'll put the text box in there. All right, we have all of the elements that we're going to need for the build of this component. Now let's go ahead and start adding properties. So we've got the first one with the background color, but now we want to take a look at our container stuff. So let's go ahead and our container properties need to be defined. So we'll say this one is going to be the info container height. Now it might be the case that you want your container height to be the same as your width, but you also might want to have the flexibility. So we're going to go ahead and create height and width. So we'll call this one the width. And again, that'll be a number option here. So we'll hit the create button there. And then we also want to create a color. So we'll say info container background. And that is a color. And then we also want to be able to adjust the radius of our container. Maybe we want it to be square and we don't want any kind of border radius of any kind, or maybe we do want that border radius. We want to have the ability to adjust that based off of what our app design or what our users are looking for, or maybe our customers looking for. So let's go ahead and add a border radius in here. So we'll call that the info container border radius. And that'll be a number value. So number and create. All right, so now we've got essentially all of the things that we're going to need for our container. But what about our button here? So let's go ahead and address our button. So we need a button size. That'll be a number, and that'll be a height and width value. It'll be the same. So we'll just do one, and we'll call it button size. And we also want to have a button color option so we can adjust the color of the button. So we'll do a color option here. All right, and that should be pretty much everything that we need for our button. Now, what about our text box here? So we do need to do some properties for the text box. And we're going to go ahead and say text font because we want to adjust the size of the font in there depending on the application design. And I keep saying that, but what does that actually mean? So if you use the default settings, this is going to work pretty good by default. But if you use a custom page layout, you might want to adjust all this because the fonts and everything look different when you start adjusting the page dimensions. So that's where this comes in handy to be able to adjust everything because you might be saying, well, I'm never going to change the font size. It's always going to be 20. Well, if you adjust the page, you might change your mind on that. So just better to have some flexibility on the design. So let's go ahead and add the font size, and then let's go ahead and add the color because maybe you have a different color theme and you want your text to be white, or you want your text to be black, or you want it to be whatever color to contrast with whatever background you chose. So let's go ahead and do a text color. Now we also want to have the ability to adjust the text, and there's different options you have here. You can just add a text box, and whatever you basically type in the text box is what's going to be here, but that's static. You can't change it. It's a one-time thing, and you might have 7 or 8 different things on your screen that need to be explained. So you want to have the ability to adjust the entire component to display a text box based off of maybe they click this button and that message is going to be displayed. So you want to be able to do that kind of configurability so you can use one component to do multiple different messaging requirements. We're going to create a new property here and we're going to say it is text options, and this will be a record. So we'll come down here and select the record option and create. Now we need a way to tell the app what was selected. Which one do you want to actually use? So we're going to create another value in here for text selected and hit create. All right, so we have a lot of different custom properties that we've built. Now let's actually go through and start assigning some of these things. So let's start with the container here. Oh, we forgot to rename some of these, so let's do that first. So we'll say icon cancel, and for this one we'll just say label text option. All right, and looks like we've got everything. Well, we got to adjust our solid here. We don't want that to be solid, so we'll say none here. All right, now I think we're ready to actually start assigning some stuff. So we'll go back up to the info container here and go in here. Now, the first thing, we want to have a gap. So let's put a gap of 10. And you'll see that we've got that gap essentially created there. And then we want to take a look at the container height and width. And we need to assign this. So let's go ahead and put a width in here. And we created that value. So info popup dot container width right here. And let's go ahead and copy that and put it in for the height also. So we can put here. There we go. All right, and we'll adjust all of these. Remember the defaults are 100 and black and everything else, so we'll have to adjust all of that. Let's go ahead and adjust our color here. So we will do info container background. And then we're going to take a look at the border radius right here. So we want to adjust that. So again, here we'll border radius. Now this one we do have to adjust in 4 places. So we'll go ahead and copy this and go back over here and take a look at the radius. All right, so we have to adjust all of these as well. And it looks like we got a circle. All right. Well, again, we're going to adjust all of that here in a little bit. Now, we do want to set this. Now, you can put whatever you want. I always go with extra bold. It kind of makes it stand off. You can see that really emphasizes that information dialog, makes it look pretty good. So I always put that in there. Now we want to take a look at our X and Y. So let's go ahead and select X here. And we want to take our look at our width. And for this, we want it to be the pop-up. So let's select the pop-up here. And it will be the width. Now we want to divide that by 2, so it puts it kind of in the middle there, but we've also got the container width that we have to take a look at. So let's subtract the info container dot width and then divide that by 2. And there we go. Now we should be right in the center. Let's go ahead and copy this and we'll put that in for the Y. But in Y, we're going to be looking at the height. So let's take a look at adjusting this to height and this one to height as well. And there we go. Now we should be right in the center. of the screen. Now, these also could be properties that you want to put into your component. Maybe you don't want it to be in the center. Maybe you want it to be over on the left or on the right, or maybe you want the flexibility to kind of decide where this is going to go on the screen. You could also create properties that allow you to do that inside of the design of this. So just keep that in mind, is that's a additional adjustments you could make in here as well. All right, let's go ahead and adjust some of these settings over here. So our info container height, we're going to go with 370. And we're going to do the same thing for the width. So we'll do 370. And then we want to take a look at our background color. That's correct there. What is our info container background color? Let's go ahead and adjust this. Now for this, I've gone with kind of what my theme is. This is, I usually go with the kind of like a bluish color theme. And it's a little bit lighter than I would have on, say, a header. So it's a good contrast for how you want to build this. And we can see it's starting to really take shape here. It's starting to look like our information dialog boxes. All right, so now we've adjusted our background colors. What about our border radius? We don't want that to be 100. Let's just say 20. Oh, that looks pretty good. And again, you could adjust that to make it more round or square if you want to. Button size, 100 is definitely too big. Let's go with 40 for that. And then we want to do button color, and black is fine there. Our text font size, ooh, that's way too big. Let's do 20 for that. And again, we haven't actually assigned these to any of the controls, so that's why we're not necessarily seeing some of these other things. We did the container initially, but we haven't to all the new things we've got here. And then our text color, black is fine there. And we're going to build the record here for this a little bit later. And same thing with this here, is we'll adjust these towards the end. All right, so now let's take a look at these other containers that we built here. So we've got this container here. We don't want that one to have a flexible height. We want to be able to adjust that based off of our size of our icon here. So let's go ahead and change this right away. So this is our custom property. So we created a custom property for the height and the width. So we'll say info popup dot button size, and we will go ahead and copy that and put that for our width. Oops. All right, so now we've got that adjusted. Now we also want to take a look at our color. So we want to adjust our color for this. And that is button color. Now we don't want it to be on the left. Maybe you do, but I always put mine on the right. So let's go ahead and adjust where in the container things go. So we want to put it over on the right side, right here. Now for this, we want to have some padding. We don't want it to be all the way up against the side there. So we're going to go ahead and put 10 all around. And there we go. So we've got 10 on the top, 10 on the bottom. That's going to be our padding here. And that's a pretty good placement there. So let's go ahead and adjust the container. So we have a height now. So let's take a look at our height in here. And that is going to be the button size. And we'll go ahead and paste in this because we copied that. And that's going to be our button size. But as you can see, we didn't account for the padding. So we need to take this and add 20 for that top and the bottom there. And that gives us a little bit of a gap there, which works great. Now, one of the things we can see here is we got these lines, and you may not be able to see this on there, but you've got these lines. Essentially, we've got the borders for these containers we can see. So let's go ahead and select both containers, and we're going to want to set the drop shadow of none. And now when we click on this, we're going to see that we don't have those lines anymore. So it looks a little bit cleaner on the app design. This portion is pretty much done for the button container. And now let's take a look at our content container. Now, again, we want to have padding. We don't necessarily need the padding on the top, but we do need it on the bottom because we want to have a little bit of a standoff there. And we'll have it on the left also for the text. And then on the right, we'll have 10. So we'll go 10 all the way around, essentially for our container, giving us a little bit of a space there. So if we select our text box, you'll see that we've got that, but it's all the way up on the top here, which works perfectly for that. All right, so what do we want the text to display here? And up here, what we're going to do is we created the selected. So we're going to go info popup dot text selected is going to be what value goes in there. Now we also want to change the location and dimensions for everything here. So we want to take a look at our width, and we want the width to be essentially the content container dot width, but we need to subtract the padding. So minus 20, and that'll put it right in the center like that. So that is essentially our width. Now we need to do the same thing with our height. So let's go ahead and copy that and put the height, instead of width, it'll be the height. And we don't want to subtract 20. This time we want to subtract 10 because we didn't have any padding up on the top. And you can see here, it is exactly where we need it to be, but our text isn't where we want it. So let's go ahead and adjust the text so that it is at the top up here. All right, there we go. So now when we add text, it's going to fill this up, and you might want to adjust the size here. We haven't set that yet. So let's go ahead and put in our font size here. And our font size is a property. So we'll do info popup dot text font size. And we also want to put our color that we created. So let's go ahead and info popup.text color. So now that our text is going to be the color and size that we selected. All right, it's starting to look like our information dialog box. Let's go ahead and take a look at our text options now. We're ready for this portion. So by default, it gives you an example here. So let's go ahead and hit format text, and it essentially is creating what we're going to build. So we're just going to modify this, and we'll use the same. We'll just have 3 options. And for this one, let's call it the search bar. And for this one, we'll go ahead and say maybe this is the form asterisk and what that means. And then we typically have the apply filters. All right. And now what we're going to do is put in the text. All right, and that's what it looks like. So now we've essentially got our 3 different options, and you could have as many as one. This is essentially just our template. So when we bring this component into our app, these will be the default options. It kind of gives the user the idea of, hey, what do we need to put in the box and how do we need to use this? So this is a great way to kind of provide that initial template or starting point. All right, now let's go ahead and select one of our defaults here. So what was our text selected? So let's go into here. And for this, we will say info popup dot text options dot search bar. And there we go. Now we have our default text added in here. And it really is just that simple. So all we need to do is adjust what we want to see, and you can add as many as you want in there. So maybe you want to see the apply filters, or maybe you want to see one of the other ones. And then you can also see how that's going to look in the design. You can also adjust the size. Now, maybe you update this from time to time and add all the ones that you've decided that are kind of the standard and you need them in every single app. That's a great approach because it gives them a list of options to kind of work from, and they're predefined, ready to go. So there's no grammar errors or spelling errors or anything like that. It's just kind of ready to go and use. And it's maybe a standardized approach across your entire organization. So it makes things a little bit easier. But that's essentially what we needed to do. Now, I don't always mention this. I probably should do a better job of that. When you're building these components, you do want to come up here and click this button here and try to fix these issues. Now, in this case, we're talking about screen 1. It's not part of the component, but if you had any accessibility or formula issues in here, you would want to make sure you adjust those here. Typically, you're not going to have a runtime error if everything seems like it's working, but you might have some sort of a missing tooltip or tabs are not set or something like that. You might want to go through and adjust these before you put it in there, because every app that you add it to is going to show those typical issues, as well as if you put it in a solution, it's going to identify that. So it's better to fix it at the component versus having to do that within the application. So just keep that in mind as well, is do this check here and look for any kind of issues, especially on your more complex components where maybe you created some variables and you ended up not using them. This will tell you to delete those, and it'll kind of keep your component a little bit cleaner and make it load a little bit faster as well. All right, now kind of one of the last things we need to do is what happens when we click this button. So we'll need to add a custom property for that, and we'll come over here and we'll call it close on select, and it is going to be an event. And we'll hit the create button. So we come click on this button here, hit the advanced, and we want to set that as info popup dot close on select. And there we go. So now when we click on this button, we'll have the option to close this box essentially for the app. So we'll go into the app and actually set what happens when that button is clicked. All right, let's go ahead and hit the save button and then publish. And now we'll have the option to go test this inside of our app. So let's go do that quick. All right, so here is our app. Let's go ahead and add this component in here. And it's the info dialog and import. All right, let's see what happens. Let's go ahead and add this to the screen here. So we'll go ahead and select the info pop-up. And there we go. now we have this. Now I have no doubt that anybody that's built apps is saying, hey, we could have done it this way or we could have done it that way. There's a million ways to build these things, so there are more ways, especially when it comes to the text here. There's definitely a much easier way to do this. The way that I built it, it essentially gives that default. So I've essentially created a way to provide training to the citizen developers, especially if you're in the GCC, federal government, government DoD, anybody that has a citizen developer, the ability to do these app designs, giving them a little bit of extra information helps them understand what they can do and different options they have for building these. So essentially, I've provided a little bit of extra training to them in the course of building this thing. And what do I mean by that? So we could do a completely different approach for putting the text in the box here. Yes, you could have just left it a text box because we're actually going to employ that now that we've built that in here is we're not really going to use what's there. We can, but there's actually a lot of different ways you can do this. But first, let's take a look at how do we make this thing not visible? So how do we hide this thing? So let's go up to the page visibility. So on visible, we'll come up here and we're going to create a variable. So we'll do update context and then we'll do there and we'll say false. All right, so we've got that set in there. Let's go ahead and copy this. And what we need to do is set the button now. So what happens on close on select? So let's go ahead and paste that in there. And we want to make it false. Now we want to set the visibility for this container. So we'll go up here and go down to the visibility. And we're going to set it as local information visible. All right, let's go ahead and add a button here. So we'll go ahead and use the information button because that's usually what I link it with, but it can be added to pretty much anything. And let's go ahead and make that large. And we'll set the width to 40 and the height to 40 also, just to make it a little bit bigger. And let's go ahead and set the on select. So what happens on select here? And that will be, and we just paste that in there. And instead of false, we're going to say true. All right, so now let's test it. Let's click the button. And now we can see this. Let's go ahead and make some adjustments here because we added all these properties. Let's go ahead and do some adjustments here. So let's change this property here. We'll go with this color here. And you can see it blocked everything off. So what we need to do is set this. And we'll put that at 20. And now you can see you kind of get that translucent. It's clear that something has changed. Let's go ahead and close this off, and then we'll click the button again so we can kind of see the difference there. I think that looks pretty good. I think that works for it. We will want to adjust this button here to display different text, but for right now, that works pretty well. Now, what text do we want to display? So we can, just like in the design, change this. So if we didn't want to apply filters, we can back this up and say form asterisk. And again, they have access to all of these right away. So it makes it very easy for the user, and you can define these across your organization for standard buttons. Now for a citizen developer, it does a little bit more. So because we've done it this way, they've seen how to set this up, right? So we have these kind of built in there. So here's the problem with containers that use approaches like this is maybe there's a change. Maybe there's a spelling error or something like this. You have to go through all of the different components that you put in there and adjust them, which can be kind of painful, right? So I know that a lot of the developers out there were saying you didn't have to do that. You could have done it in a completely different way. I've essentially provided training to the user on how to use this. So it gives them more latitude to kind of build their own processes. So maybe they want to add multiple different options to here. What we can do is we can copy all of this and we're going to go to the app and we're going to go take a look at formulas. And in here, we're going to paste it and then we're going to have to make some adjustments here. So we'll get rid of this. We'll get rid of that. And then we're going to change this to equals. And we're essentially taking advantage of named formulas. So we can do that. And then we have to change this. And every citizen developer in our organization, and change this. And then I always try to close it off as well. So we'll go put that there. Okay, so now we have named formulas. And every single one of our developers now has access to this. You might have to provide a little bit of education on how to do the name formula portion of it, or you just send them to this video so they can see how it works. But we can now leverage this in here. So let's go back to our screen here and let's change this. And what we want to do is change what happens when we update this variable here. So we want to put this next here, and we want to add another update context. So we'll do update context, and then we'll put the curly brackets in there. And what we want to do is set a variable for info box. So it's going to be the info box message. And then what we can do is just pick one of our name formulas. So maybe it's the apply filters. And then when we come over to our info pop box, our box here, what we want to do is set our text selected to match that info box message. So when we click this, it's going to show what we selected, right? And if we close this, we can go back over here and we can click on our button and we can see that we said apply filters. Now, maybe we don't want the apply filters. Maybe we want the search bar. So we'll select the search bar and we'll hit our button and there we go. So every button essentially has this information added to it, and then you just adjust which message based off of what on the screen that you're talking about. And you can use those name formulas. But when we gave them the component, we gave them the list to use. So when we go in here and we see text options, we gave them all the list of different options. They can go in there and create the name formulas. That way, if you have a change, let's say there's a grammatical or spelling issue in here, all they need to do is go into here and change it. And then it's going to change it everywhere in the app where this is used. So it's a very effective way to do this. Now, this also works, although not in name formulas, but in collections. You can do the same thing with the side navigation. I didn't cover that in the last video. I am going to cover it in the next video. Again, a little bit of variety from video to video on how you can do these things. But now we've given the ability to essentially use one component for all of our information needs using name formulas. And we also provided some basic understanding of how all of this works. You can just use this. You can just use this and you can basically set that variable inside of there as well. And you always have to set the selected to a variable, but you can still just use the text options if you want to. So, but I tend to find this to be a little bit easier because if you do make that change, it will update the entire app. Now, what about if we want to make some changes? So let's say we don't want borders. So we change this to 0. What happens? All right, now we got a square. Or maybe we want more of a border, so we'll make it more rounded. So you have a lot of flexibility on how you set this up. Maybe you want your buttons to be bigger. So let's make this 60, and the button gets a lot bigger. Maybe you want to make it smaller, so you make it 10, and it gets microscopic. So that's why I go with 40. I think that's a pretty good mix there. Or we could adjust the size. So maybe we want to make this 500. And there we go. Now we've got more space for our information. So a lot of flexibility on how you use this. Maybe you want to change your button colors or you want to change your background color. You have the flexibility to do all of those changes now that you've built this out, and you can put it on every screen to account for every possibility for information. Well, that's pretty much it for today's video. Hopefully you found it helpful. Until next time.